With Shadow Generations very close up on the horizon now, I've started thinking about the potential of the games that'll follow it. And now I know the game isn't actually out yet, but I'm already giving it full stars because from what I've seen, it already makes me more hopeful than ever for any upcoming games, because Sega and Sonic Team have most definitely stepped up their game here. And what better game to immediately jump to than Frontiers 2, or rather a sequel to the Frontiers formula. And from the trailers, we can already see that even in Shadow Gens, there's some Frontiers DNA in it, mainly with the open world for Shadow to traverse seemingly between levels, and it even looks like they've already improved on that formula. It's hard to go in depth with it before I actually play it myself, but I can already see some revisions, mainly in the cohesion of the world and its platforming segments, and I really do hope they continue to improve on that. Now when it comes to Frontiers itself, the implementation of the platforming aspects into the open world was only one of what I consider to be Frontiers' biggest flaws, and honestly, not even my biggest one personally. So let me just lay out the aspects that I find need the most fine-tuning. Namely, 1, the combat, 2, the cyberspace levels, or whatever its adjacent will be called in future games, and 3, the open world platforming segments and the general environment. Now, these aren't really in any particular order of importance, and honestly, these things kind of differ from person to person, even just down to what the list will entail, but let me expand on these from my perspective a bit. I'm going to start with the combat because this is where my biggest personal gripe is, and it's most definitely what I'm going to yap about the most. See, the combat, while flashy, is very surface level, and I find that to be the greatest shame of this game. Like, don't get me wrong, I still loved it anyways, because I'm a very easy man to please, but I couldn't just ignore its issues either. Because essentially, we unlock all these cool looking moves from our skill tree throughout the game, but there isn't really much of a reason to use these different moves beyond, oh yeah, this will look cool. And this can satisfy a lot of people, and I was one of them for a little while, but I think most of my problems with it got intensified with the Final Horizons DLC, most namely the boss rush at the last tower. Being under such a strict time limit meant we had to optimize our combos to actually get through the whole thing. Especially for that rat bastard wyvern. But this pretty much came down to attack, stomp, repeat as the fastest damage dealer. Not fun and not typically how I go about fighting, but I needed as many rings as possible for that stupid wyvern fight. And I'm sure you can see the issue here, right? Spamming just the one move should never be optimal in a game like this, but when under a challenge like that, the game almost pushes you to do it. We have an entire list of skills, but they all do basically the same thing in just simply dealing damage. Now, in all fairness, some moves are more useful or even necessary against certain enemies, like the Sonic Boom against those ball enemies or the Stomp against those spring enemies, but in general, the combat doesn't really have much of a difference in effect between the moves, and nothing to incentivize you to string these different moves together either. Plus, on top of this, we have a parry that's just way too easy to use, because you can just hold the buttons down for an auto defense at any time. I typically avoided using it in the base game because it just felt too easy, really only busting it out when I was low on health or literally needed it for a boss or a mission. But in the Final Horizons boss rush, this gets taken away from you, and it's really there where you notice how the game wasn't really built around using the parry like a typical parry, most namely against, you guessed it, the wyvern fight. Most of the moves are telegraphed fairly okay, but it's really the hitboxes and the timings that are the real problem. Like against Giganto and Knight, it's not that big of an issue if you can't parry well, because you don't have to use it. But against Wyvern, it's quite literally necessary to beat him. And these attacks were very clearly not made with the new perfect parry in mind, and it was the bane of my existence for the entire DLC, just for how off-putting the timing for the actual parry was. So basically I can boil down my issues with the combat to two main things, in that one, there's a lack of incentive to use other moves, and 2, just the unrestricted parry in general. And just off the top of my head, I can already think of a few ways to help alleviate the first problem, and one could be to give different skills different effects. Like maybe some attacks do less damage but break through tough defenses easier, or some could cause certain status effects while others deal more damage to enemies with certain effects on them. Or simply having attacks that do a lot of weak hits but can easily build up our combo meter. Something along those lines. Then another could be to just add a bonus for linking different moves together, with the simplest being just a damage boost. Like, we do have a combo meter in the game, and reaching a certain number with it gives us the Phantom Rush, which gives us a little attack boost and whatnot, but it doesn't really motivate people to use different moves together. So I think adding some sort of other bonus along with that damage boost could help incentivize people to use different attacks more. Plus, for the combo meter itself, this part isn't too huge, but I would like if they could add either more stages to the combo meter or adding customizability to it. Like, we decide from a certain list what bonus we want to get when we reach certain parts of the combo meter. This isn't necessary, but I wouldn't mind seeing that. Plus, on the other side of things, we could also just simply weaken the damage of spammed moves, because this motivates the player pretty easily to use different moves, because if they see that what they're doing isn't optimal, and also probably isn't fun to them, they're going to try different methods. Then we have the second issue with the unrestricted parry, and this is an easy one to fix. Just don't add it. That way the game can be better built around its use, leading to better telegraphed attacks and a greater sense of reward when you use it. Or, if needs be, they can always just leave the unrestricted parry accessible to easy mode. Because hey, I'm not here to make things worse for other people if they have a hard time with these kinds of things. But if these two main things get fixed in the next game, I'm already pretty dang satisfied. But let's get on to the next issue. The cyberspace levels are an easier issue to talk about because these are essentially just our regular Sonic levels in this game. And while level design isn't exactly my forte, I generally don't have too much of an issue with the actual designs of these levels, although this doesn't include the themes, and I'll mention that later, but rather the sense of speed. Because something about the static camera used throughout the levels just really brings down the sense of speed we usually feel. Like, compare the cyberspace levels to Unleashed Day stages. You can feel a difference in speed, right? But the funny thing is that generally it isn't the actual speed that we're moving at that's the issue, but rather the camera work. Because I remember seeing this tweet on Twitter, messing around with how the camera works in the cyberspace levels to resemble more how it is in the older Boost games, and it instantly looked so much better. The use of a slightly shaky, more dynamic camera does wonders for how speed actually feels in the game, and it's a pretty easy fix too. And then the other issue is another pretty small one, and it's the speed of the homing attack. Because they use the same kind of homing attack in cyberspace levels as the one in the open world, but it doesn't make any sense for them to do that, and it was a bit of a flow killer whenever I used it. And when I say this, I mean that after hitting an enemy with your homing attack, it slows down for a short bit and pauses a bit before you can use another action. And in the overworld, this makes sense because it's made to mesh with the combat, but there isn't any combat in the cyberspace levels. Hell, I might be misremembering this part, but I'm almost sure that even the damage numbers still show up in cyberspace, despite enemies dying in one hit there. So, another easy fix. Just take that aspect out of the cyberspace levels and we're solid. Hell, fix both of these things and we're liquid. Perhaps even a beverage of sorts. And with that out of the way, we get to our last points of just the open world platforming and the environments in general. And now, like I said before, in regards to Shadow Gens, it seems like they're already getting better at meshing the platforming with the actual feel of the world, but this is Frontiers we're talking about right now. This isn't the biggest point of contention for me personally, but it's something to note anyways, in that it really does feel like the platforming sections of the overworld are just kinda slapped onto the world. feeling kinda out of place. Really, we can just chalk this up to better design in the next game. Of course, not to say that the world shouldn't have rails and springs and regular Sonic stuff in it, but rather to just have it fit the environment a bit more. Like using Sonic Heroes as an example, the rails in, say, Rail Canyon aren't the same ones that you see in, say, Egg Fortress, you know? They're all just rails to grind on, but the rails and the obstacles and everything fit the level that they're actually in at the time, rather than the base design that they used to blanket every level in Frontiers. And again, this isn't really the biggest place of contention for me. I'd put more of that stock into the environments themselves, because I won't lie to you, the locales from Frontiers aren't exactly my favorites in the franchise. The actual graphics of them isn't really the issue. They look pretty gorgeous in places, honestly, but rather that it doesn't really feel Sonic-y, you know? Like for our islands, we just have the basic Forest Island, Desert Island, Volcano Island. And for the vibe of this game specifically, I understand why they went in the direction that they did, but I just don't want this to become the standard. I want them to hit me with some more colorful and lively and unique locales for the next game. And if they do that, I'm sold really easily. And I also want to emphasize the unique part of this, because I don't want to see any more Green Hill or Chemical Plant or Sky Sanctuary. No more of that. We're done with that. We need new levels now. Plus, just as a little side itch that I had, I also wasn't too keen on the voice direction for Sonic and Amy in particular for this game. Like, not a slight against the actual actors themselves by any means, because they've done good work before, and they do good work in this game too. But I just feel like they tried to age up their voices for this game, and it felt strange. Like, Sonic's voice felt weirdly deep, while Amy's felt less like a girl and more like a grown mother of 3. But that's nothing major. I just figured I'd drop this in right there because there wasn't really anywhere else in this to place that. Now, just to wrap things up here, I want to point out that I say all these things because I genuinely love Frontiers, and I just want to see these things improved on in a sequel, because then it can make that game absolutely stellar. Like, Frontiers are still a great game in its own right, and it's pretty much the Sonic game that got me back into the series in recent times, and I couldn't be more thankful for that. And now seeing Shadow Gens and how they're rocking with that, I'm honestly more confident in the quality of the series than quite possibly I've ever been. So I have high hopes for them going forward.